we know what we're talking about?
Season 3.
Hi, I'm John Stevens.
This is Matt Russell.
This
Is Pod Have Mercy. So where are you in the world right now?
I'm at home, and this is my little office space, which is in used to be one of the girls' bedrooms, and now is when Joshua moved into his own apartment, Grace moved across the house into her own room with her own bathroom, and so this is part of a Jack and Jill, and now it's a little TV room, and they have their gaming stuff in here, and I have my little workspace, and it works.
That's great. That's great.
I moved out of my bedroom and into this one.
That's great. That happens when
which is all COVID, right?
Yeah, right. What happens when your kids move on too? You get a little more space. So,
yeah. We still have 3 in the house though, so it's not like there's lots of space or anything. Yeah. And everybody's on a different schedule and all the craziness. But I know you know craziness. So.
Yeah, I would love to. I still remember our first discussion in, I forget what restaurant it was in Dallas, where we were talking about one thing and then we ended up talking about kids, and it was just like trauma bonding.
I know. We were in Foddy's over there.
Yeah, that's right.
Off of 75 and Knox, right? And I do remember. I was like, dang.
Right.
Just, never mind the,
whatever the discussion was supposed to be about.
I don't even know what it was supposed to be about, but it was great.
John just walked in, but you could be the live audience.
Can I sit in the chair? Oh, is there coffee?
There is coffee.
Hello.
Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Is that the change the channel in case I don't like what she's saying?
No, that's the volume.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Did you already record the podcast?
Yeah.
Is it over? Did I miss it?
It was awesome.
That's good. Oh. Look at this.
I know. We put in a new bookstore in the church, and the hospitality folks got a new coffee machine that they're just totally geeked up about. And so we've got a lampshade that provides coffee, and then these folks always bring by crazy things.
So this is from downstairs?
Yeah.
It is.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, today's just really going to be a conversation with you, like I said on the email, and it's really, John is really an introvert.
I'm just going to sit here and drink coffee while you two have smart conversations.
John's an introvert and won't say much, and so trying to pull him out of his shell and to kind of just, talk with folks.
You can talk Wesley and Bart and Tillich, and I'll talk chickies and duckies and puppies.
And organizational theory. This is why you and Lisa Greenwood will get along well, actually, because Lisa spans both of those worlds, right? So as we begin, first of all, I just want to say thanks for being here. And number one, I've gotten to know you kind of at the TMF and at the UMDF, and for the last 5 or so years, have just been impressed by just your insight, your ability to convene folks and have these really rich conversations that often happen on the edge of where the church is attempting to grow or attempting to make meaning. And that's not always, growth isn't always the dynamic, but is always kind of asking the question of what's happening and what are the next steps to move in fidelity towards what the Spirit's calling us to. And so, number one, I've learned a ton from you on many levels, and just want to say thanks for being here. And I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at the TMF and the UMDF and what's kind of giving you life right now.
Yeah. So it is really good to be here. And I have loved our relationship, Matt, along the years, along the way. getting to know each other and just watching the way that you move through relationships and connecting people and those unlikely kinships that have made such a difference in my life too. So thank you for asking me. It's really good to be here. And John and Matt both, just watching you all and Chapelwood really live into your mission is awe-inspiring. So so really fun to be with y'all. Thank you for asking me. It's a real treat.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm coming to you from Dallas. I live in Dallas, and I grew up here, and went to University of Texas Austin, and went to Yale Divinity School, and then came back to the North Texas Conference and served in churches for about 20 years. And the last part of that time, I was also consulting with Horizon Stewardship Company, and I'm condensing a lot of years and a lot of personal life and ministry, right?
Right.
But let me say that there was a season where I was getting to work with churches on the generosity side of things, and it changed my life in a lot of ways. I deepened my own discipleship, and I would always say that when we would do a capital campaign, which honestly I would never have thought would have brought me such joy and sort of a convergent experience as it did, really, if anyone had asked me. But what I found is, I did youth ministry for a lot of years, and in youth ministry, you could do more in 1 week on a mission trip or at camp than you could do the whole year, right, in Sunday school or MYF. And that's what I experienced when I got to work with churches for a condensed amount of time over, particularly raising funds that would make their dreams, living into their God-sized dreams, a reality. And so it really, what I found is that I was doing discipleship work, right? I was helping them lean into what it was that God was asking of them, and I was having a lot of fun in ministry, and in the midst of those years of ministry, not just with Horizons, but in my local church ministry, I got to know Tom Locke and Jim Turley and the work that was happening through the Texas Methodist Foundation, and saw the ways that they were coming alongside pastors in their work, and saw the ways that they were coming along congregations and helping them live into their mission. And I loved that. And I remember being really at a point in my adult life and in my ministry where I was just the happiest and most content and fulfilled that I had been. And I couldn't imagine a job that I would want more in ministry except for Jim Turley's job, right? But Jim Turley already had that job, and he was so phenomenal at it. Anyway, it turned out that Jim was headed toward retiring, and they invited me to come on and be on the team and to learn about what they were doing, and that really. This whole journey, these last 9 years with the Texas Methodist Foundation, and now with what we call the Wesleyan Investive, right?
That's right.
UMDF, or United Methodist Development Fund, is renamed to the Wesleyan Investive, and getting to do this work in leadership ministry has been incredible. And I can say more about that, but I mean, that's just a little bit of a journey of how I got here. Probably entirely too long-winded.
No, long-winded's good. Especially on a podcast where dead air is not, it's kind of frowned upon by the producer.
Right.
Hey, so tell me, what are you experiencing over the last year and a half that seems to you to be radically different than maybe things you experienced before? I think we all were, kind of in a rhythm or a routine, or maybe we took things for granted, or fill in the blank. But for not just for church leaders, but for people who are in churches who may not even have an understanding behind the curtain. What are you hearing or sensing or experiencing that churches are dealing with, and leaders are dealing with, that's very different now than it was before March of 2020?
Right. So here's what I would say, and I know you've heard this from others, that it's not so much that it's different as much as it is accelerated in terms of the level of and the rate of change is accelerated. And I would say the things that felt around the corner, if you will, for the church are screaming at us right now. And that has to do with our relevancy. It has to do with our methodology. We've been about gathering. We've spent so much energy getting people into one room for an hour. And we haven't always paid attention to how folks are being formed and how folks are growing in their relationship with God through Christ, how the church is connected to the community. And I feel like even as I'm saying these sweeping generalizations, that I'm talking to Chapelwood United Methodist Church that I would say doesn't fit into some of those sweeping generalizations in quite the same way that some other churches have. You guys have been engaged with your community in creative ways for generations. But that said, I think in general, the church is meeting this culture that is no longer pushing people toward the church, but is pulling people away from the church. And that has been true for decades. But in the last 18 months, it is just it's this tidal wave washing over us that we can no longer ignore. And so we have to think about our identity and our purpose in a whole new way.
That's really good. It's been interesting as we talk about some of that as well, and even thinking about like the creation of new church services or whatever. What at least I think we're finding here is that people are really desiring to have kind of connection and community, not just services, and so some of that has shifted even my focus towards kind of small batch ways of connecting people that are having like profound dividends in ways I wasn't expecting. Right? Like this kind of roadways in the desert kind of stuff that Isaiah talks about. And so, and almost, and I think you've talked about this. I know that Bishop Huey has, I know that, John continues to encourage our community to look at things that we might not notice otherwise. Right? It's a new set of spiritual practices are needing to be developed so that we can see with new eyes things we couldn't see before. And where are some of those things that you're noticing, or what are some of the ways that emerges? Right.
So one of the big things that you've heard me talk about a lot is this mixed ecology of the church. And let me say that we use the image of the ecosystem a lot. It's just, rich soil, if you will, for imagery and metaphor. And
very Margaret
and so
Wheatley
we think
you.
about
Yes,
and we draw on her a lot, right? So if you think about mixed ecology, we have for a long time in the church put all our eggs in the basket of the inherited attractional model church. If you build it, they will come kind of church growth. And I'm not suggesting that we abandon that, but I'm saying that that we need biodiversity in the ecosystem, right? So if you think about biodiversity, they say it's the infrastructure that supports all life, right? You need this biodiversity, and a loss of biodiversity has been called the silent killer. And that by the time you feel what's happening, it may be too late, right? Okay, so I think that describes where we are in the church, because we have put all our eggs in sort of one species, and that's the attractional model church.
okay, so now what's emerging are these small batch, if you will, even within the church, kind of more missionally minded, more thinking about how are we connecting with the community, how are we bringing people into relationship with each other, and doing that in all kinds of ways, online and in-house churches. And then we also have some that are not connected, particularly with congregations, but they're popping up in coffee houses and in breweries and in laundromats and again online and all those sorts of things, right? And that we actually need this mixed ecology, this biodiversity to be the witness that the church is called to be. But we have equated the body of Christ, the church, with attractional model congregations, when in fact the body of Christ, the church, yes, we want those congregations, and there are lots of expressions of ways to be the church that bring people into relationship with one another and with God that we need to nurture right now, especially in this season.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that it's hard to give that model up for some churches. I don't know that I would define most mainline United Methodist congregations as attractional. I think the statistics kind of speak otherwise. We're not really doing a good job attracting. But I have noticed that there are a lot of congregations here in Houston or other big cities. You see a lot of them that are really based around that model. And it's almost like they're doubling down coming out of the pandemic. Because it's all they know. It's all they're built around. So there isn't, they don't have history. You know, one of the things I've been reading this book on truth that we're going to talk about another time, but it says when you lose your sense of history, you lose truth. And you start to just deal with sort of emotive stuff. It's all what you feel. And this is what you see in society now. It's like it's all data driven. So facts are gone. Now we poll things, and then you have to sort of layer some assumption on that. But it's all rooted in how I feel about something. So whether it's politics or race or vaccines or masks or whatever it is, it's like, what do I feel, rather than a collective historical way of thinking about what we do. And it becomes very individualized. But I've noticed that coming out of the pandemic, there's almost a doubling down in certain elements of Christianity around Christian nationalism or attractional, big box type churches. And I don't know that they know any other language or way to be. And I think that's the hard part for a church that wants to pay attention to history, wants to listen, wants to learn, wants to tap into wisdom, and is willing to be lead like Moses. We're leading, but we know we're not perfect. But there's something about society where I think that's going to be attractional to people, but I don't know that it is yet. We're in a between
already
period.
not yet.
Yeah, I think what good churches are doing is going to, it's like anything in organizational cultures or system series, a delay in the system, right? So there's a delay in the logistical network of thing, and we're in the delay, and we think we don't see the results, and so we try something else instead of sticking with what we feel strongly is who we are.
Yeah. So you've said some really important things in there, John, because one thing is when we don't know what to do, we do what we already know how to do, right? And so right now we don't know what to do. I mean, we're in a season we've never seen before, and dramatically so. And so we double down on what we already know how to do. And that gets us stuck in that kind of treadmill of working harder at what we've already done, instead of expanding our imagination and asking a new question or doing something in a different way. And that feels really important right now for leaders to be thinking to change the question, to really think about who we are, who we've been, who we are, and who we're called to be, so that we can not necessarily do what we've always done, but be immediate and responsive in our context and that sort of thing.
The other side of that is, you only learn one of two ways. You either learn by imitating some other model that's out there, imitation that works, or trial and error. And I think forever before the pandemic, we were always imitating. We were finding a model that was successful, like North Point, in Atlanta.
For 1999,
or 12 Stone in Atlanta, or, you pick out, Watermark in Austin, whatever these churches
Willow
are.
Creek.
Yeah, you find these churches and you go, we have to do it exactly like them. It's a methodological sort of, whatever happened there in the suburbs of Chicago will fit in Adel, Georgia, where there's 550 people.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. But so the imitation, but we did that. We did it. So it's like when contemporary worship was big, every church had to have a contemporary worship service. But what I'm finding now is that there are no models to imitate, because as I tell people when they call me, venting about whatever it is, I'm like, I didn't get the playbook for pandemic. I didn't get this playbook. So I know as much as you do, which is nothing about. So to me, it's when you go down back to values, right? You have to sort of have identity.
Yes.
You have to have values, and you have to double down on those aspects. Like, what's your charism? Who are you in this moment?
Right.
How do you vocation? It's just it's like the Israelites or the Hebrews in Babylon. And God says, build your houses there, work your jobs there, raise your families there, be where you are, be planted, and just be there and be faithful in that moment. That's what I think is the trial and error moment that we're in. Is we're learning how to be community in the midst of Babylon, of some type.
Yeah, that's right. And in that place, that's where I think, like folks like TMF, the Wesleyan Vestive, other I'm sure there's other organizations too, but are creating spaces to hold for the church to, in some ways, kind of breathe through its own panic attack. Because collectively it feels like we're denominationally and religiously, we're in this panic attack, and what we have to do is, I think, to go back to the practices that root us in where we're to be, because I think John's right in that all theology ends up being contextual theology, right? Because of the incarnation, there's 1,000 different ways we can cut that up. But because Jesus shows up in flesh in a particular place, we show up in flesh in a particular place. That's why Zondervanding of whatever doesn't work always. It's a quick fix, but I have to exegete this zip code and my own life and the context of relationships I'm in. And that's what God does to move. Or that's the stuff that God has, right?
Well, and one of the things that talk about, Lisa, some things that TMF does, I know, like Melissa Mayer is in a cohort group that I believe is a TMF group.
Yeah.
And it's like innovative, cutting edge, let's get out here. I mean, I don't even know what's made up of the group. I know Mercy Street, which is a Chapelwood community, but talk a little bit about like things that happen in those types of think tanks. I don't know how you phrase them, but TMF does these groups where trial and error can be embraced and lifted up, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's the hope. And I love the way you put that, Matt, that, we're really trying to help leaders, congregations, organizations, but leaders especially, take a deep breath like any of us would do in a moment of panic, right? That to stop, put both feet on the ground, take a deep breath, remember who you are. Right. And that's part of what we're trying to do with leaders, not in a way that tells them that where they exit their work, but actually where they're more present to it. Right. Where they're paying attention to what's happening in their context, where they're paying attention, as you said, John, to their own charisms, to the charisms of their organization and how to meet this context in this moment. So the groups that we gather of leaders, and let me say that, we're intentional about gathering leaders who we believe are in a position to leverage change. And that's in their own organizations, but also larger change in the system. And because that starts locally, and that we have exceptional facilitators, and we give them space, retreats, that kind of thing, for them to listen, learn, be with their peers, ask hard questions. So it's not intended to be instructional, skills based, or prescriptive in any way. It really is intended for them to have a lot of agency over their time and what they need. And we lean into learning journeys. In other words, they might go immerse themselves in a community where they're learning from artists or civic leaders or that sort of thing, as well as church-related folks who are doing amazing things, and help them think outside the box. So, to use adaptive leadership language, Heifetz and Linsky and such, we're trying to give them balcony space where they can get outside of the sort of urgent, immediate space of the dance floor and kind of see the big picture and think about, what their world is like, what is needed, care for their own soul, but also be really present to what God is asking of them. Yeah.
What are you learning from those spaces, and what are you seeing? Are there things that are kind of connecting the dots or threads that run through that you're learning from?
Yeah. So the best things that I hear from leaders who are in those groups are things like, I think I might have left ministry if I hadn't been in this group at a place that reminded me of what God is doing in and through me, and that I'm not alone in this. Or when I hear things like, I have more courage in my work every day because I've been in this group and I've expanded my imagination, but I also know there are others who are also wrestling with, questions and identity and purpose. And so I'm more courageous. We're also seeing what I know you all are seeing too, that a liminal season like we're in, where everything's uncertain, not just some things, but everything feels uncertain. This liminal season is exhausting. It's exhausting to like our best leaders who are still excited about ministry and still finding ways to be creative are exhausted because their family layers and their work layers and everything that's happening in the culture, it's exhausting. And so we also try to create space that doesn't feel exhausting, that feels life-giving, so that there's a sense of getting, renewed for the work, because the work is so valuable, so important as we help people connect with love and grace and mercy and justice and hope and joy,
Well, I'm interested in what these groups do. I'm in a TMF group that now we've been on hiatus for a while. Some large church pastors, and it's funny how we pinged up recently to have a Zoom call just to kind of reconnect. But it's been hard when you have those groups and you meet 2 or 3 times a year, and then you don't meet at all in the time when you really do need to meet and need to kind of figure out, hey, how are you handling this? What are you all doing? And it's comforting in some ways to know that they don't have any better idea how to handle things than you do. And at the same time, it's discouraging because like no one has the answer, but it's very encouraging because it's like we are of one purpose here. We're of one mind. We are the same people. We're all struggling with this, and we don't know what the answer is. Yeah. And so I'm interested though, like I know in Melissa's group, that group, unlike ours, which is a support group, an affinity group around large church pastors, we have executive pastor groups. And then this group is really doing innovative stuff like new ministry, things that are sort of connecting in ways that, maybe the church hasn't done before. And are you seeing or sensing anything coming out of this that speaks to what the church may look like in the future, or some characteristics or attributes that may scare somebody or cause somebody to be uncomfortable, or what are you seeing and sensing that might be like over the horizon next for some of these people in these groups, or for churches in general?
Yeah. Well, so you're speaking directly to this mixed ecology piece, and where we're intentionally investing both with TMF and the Wesleyan Investive. And that is to say that, in the mixed ecology, we think the congregational models need to continue to be as strong as they can be. And we're going to continue to put resources into congregations. And we think that in this mixed ecology, there need to be some non-traditional congregations and some non-traditional faith communities, and even some faith-based nonprofits that are doing disciple-making work. And so this group that Melissa's in particularly is what we call an edge leaders group, right? And I'm using air quotes because, how do you define center and edge? Well, part of what we're doing is we're investing in leaders who find themselves on the edge of the inside. In other words, all of these leaders are deeply committed to the work of the church, but some find themselves, but all of them are also deeply committed to innovation and have kind of an entrepreneur's spirit in them. Some are serving local churches and living out that kind of innovation and even a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit from a local church place. And these are our center leaders. And largely they're pastoring local churches. Then we have a group of edge leaders, and they are folks that are they're also edge of the inside, but they're a little further on the edge of the inside. And so they're doing some of these creative ministries like Melissa, where, she is pastoring a faith community, but it's certainly on the edges of, your not what you would call your traditional congregation. And her whole group is made up that way. So they are, what we find is that the system itself, and I mean the system of the denomination or seminaries and that kind of infrastructure that exists, tends to have a lot in place to support folks who lead from the center. But less to support folks who are leading in edge spaces, right? And so we're really trying to create some space where they feel supported. We're investing in them so that they have a peer group and facilitation, and they're going on these learning journeys, and we're, connecting them with, human-centered design tools and with some, other kind of learnings out there. Their needs are very different from center. They're raising funds differently, and they're engaging their communities very differently. And so really trying to give them space to be encouraged and supported, but also to have access to some tools that they might not otherwise have access to.
That's
I don't know,
great.
is that helpful?
Yeah, totally. One of the things I've loved about TMF is that language that y'all use in terms of center edge, because I realized too that there's y'all are creating, like John had said, like these communities of people that are, it's a new network of relationships. And one of the things I've learned in this place is that the center and the edge can often coexist, right? And it's often best in terms of the mixed ecology that you talk about, to have a church that is concentrating on the center, but also has deep investment to people that are living on the edge, right? And so that those, there's an iterative kind of communication that goes back and forth, and the center is not trying to house train the folks on the edge, and the folks on the edge aren't saying, y'all just don't get it, like a bunch of adolescents maybe, but there's like, oh wait, what are you seeing in these places, and how does that binocular seeing affect the way that we collectively understand what we're doing in this world? And y'all have done, I think, a superb job at that.
Well, I appreciate that. And what I want to say is that you all have done an amazing job at it at Chapelwood. I mean, you really are a glimpse of a mixed ecology under this sort of umbrella of Chapelwood. I mean, and you own up to the fact that it's not like everything has worked perfully. You're like, okay, well, we tried this. Okay, well, that's not, we're not going to.
We have a couple of monumental failures. You can lift up as case studies.
You can smell the burning in the back.
That's the way it ought to be, right? I think we all too often want it all to be perfect, and then we just, double down, as you say,
right,
into something that really needs to be just let go of, and let's just learn from that and move on. And you guys, I mean, really, you're doing some amazing work that I think exemplifies that mixed ecology.
Well, I say monumental failures. I kind of say that jokingly. I mean, anything it's like you go back to how do you learn things, and people always talk about failure. The learning also happens when you either have a match or a mismatch in what you intend to have happen. And so I always define effectiveness. For a long time in our denomination, we're like, well, we got to define effectiveness. Effectiveness is easy to define. It's just, can you do what you say you can do? And if you can't do what you say you can do you understand why you didn't do it? That's effectiveness. And so everything doesn't always work out. But I think the church in America, at least since I've been a pastor for almost 30 years now, is you can never talk about failure. So in our denomination, for example, and I'm sure it's like this in others as well, is like when you get together, you have to talk about how many more people I had and how many more things I'm doing and how great it is and how wonderful. I mean, you never go to a Methodist denominational or Presbyterian or Episcopalian or Lutheran meeting and go, man, it really sucks right now. I'm sucking wind. It's horrible. I don't know, they don't talk that way. It always has to be like the rah-rah, the one-upper.
Right.
And so I think that's what puts us in a position now. If you're not a church that has been really willing to embrace trial and error and willing to embrace the error, the failure. What would be a failure for us, though, is not a failure. We started a worship community in East Downtown, with the best of intentions, and now they're an Episcopalian congregation. Now, that might be a failure for what we intended it to be, but I don't think in the kingdom of God it's a failure at all. I think it's actually a success. But it's something we tried and we put money into and we lost it, right? It's gone.
Yeah.
And so I think the way you evaluate success and failure is important. And I don't know that we've done a good job, not only in the churches, but teaching our people to understand how that works. Chapelwood has always been a place that's willing to take risks. And I think culturally, as one of your values as an organization, if you're not willing to take risks and fail, then it's not really trial and error because you don't believe in error. I mean, how do you really try something scary if you refuse to fail?
Right.
Right.
Not well.
That's a question. I'm asking.
I'm sitting on
You're
that.
sitting here looking at me, and I'm asking you a question. It's not rhetorical. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to fail. I mean, look at all of the great stories of transformation. There's some failure there of where that, and you were talking earlier about grounding you in that moment.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that it's starting to help us understand that what we have called faith has been much more rooted in certainty, right? And if another word for faith is risk, I have to risk forward into a path that I do not know where it will go. Then I'm not as if, I'm saying to God, hold my beer, watch this. It's more, oh, dear God, every step of the way. It's the Merton prayer. I don't know the way that I'm going, or even if it's the right way. All I know is that my desire is to please you. And I hope that is enough, And I think that's the way of, of risk and faith that the church is being summoned to. And those that do that, I don't know where that takes us, but it takes us to an edge that I think there's a smell of beauty and joy and friendship and, it's all that stuff. Or we stay, I think, in the first half of life spiritually, So anyway.
Right. And we will stay there if we don't lean into those places of risk and faith and such. And then I think it's up to us, all of us. But I think particularly some of us who have a perspective from the outside or on the edge of the church a little bit, like TMF, like the Wesleyan Investive, to pay attention to where it's happening and where it's happening well, and to shine a light on it and to help some of these leaders who are doing this to find each other, right? I mean, I think there's a real gift and a power in knowing that you're not alone as you're stepping way out into this unknown and trying these risky things. And so it feels right now, this season, I feel an urgency about really paying attention to those leaders who are stepping out and doing and taking risks and stepping out in faith and to connect and to pay attention and connect them with each other and offer support. And that feels really important for right now.
That's beautiful.
Hey, so I'm pivoting. Do you get a sense that at TMF y'all work with a lot of pastors? Do you get a sense that pastoral ministry, I mean, people are bailing or are leaving or departing? Did she freeze? She did.
Oh no!
But that was a good face to freeze on.
That was.
Because
There she is. There she is. She's back.
She's back. Yeah, you froze up for a No, but you know what? It was really good because the face you froze on was great. Sometimes I freeze like this, like.
I thought it might be because I was like, I think I'm frozen, so I was afraid it was going to be like.
Hey, this is the Zoom life we live now. I think everybody's used to it. Mm-hmm. At least you had your sound on. So no, I was just asking about pastoral ministry. Yeah. Do you find pastors just giving up on ministry these days? I mean, at TMF, you work with a lot of pastors, or just the morale of pastors. What's the take you experience?
Yeah. Actually, we were just talking about that in our team meeting. That early in the pandemic, we got connected, and I can't remember right at the moment what the guy's name, but talking about sort of those phases of trauma, and Bishop Huey saying she learned after. I guess maybe it was one of the hurricanes in Houston or something when she was bishop there, that you can expect after a great trauma, and this was thinking about nonprofit work or whatever, that half of the initial kind of workers and leaders in kind of trauma recovery work in the nonprofit sector would leave, right? And just offered that as an image for, even the church. And then, so we were thinking about that in the pandemic, and we're thinking half, oh my gosh, and I don't think it's been half, but I can tell you over and over and over again, we're hearing from leaders, and these are exceptional leaders in the center as well as on the edge, who are really questioning how long they can do this. And yes, I think it's directly about the pandemic and how hard this is, but it's more than that. It's about this season that we're in. It's about how polarized our culture is and how hard it is to be the church in this season. And so every time they show up and even make a prophetic stance, how polarizing that is in the church and how they get it from both sides, right? And how exhausting that is. And folks just saying, God, there are ways I can serve God and live into that calling and not have to put up with this. And I also think what we've been talking about this whole time about the church facing its own crisis of relevancy in a culture that so needs love and grace and mercy and justice and hope and on. And if you signed up for that, and what you're doing is figuring out what to do with your building that feels increasingly irrelevant, and what to do with a congregation that's not even, dialed in, if you will, and that it's just exhausting.
I'd take it a step further. It's like there's the practical sort of things you do in ministry, like trying to pay the bills and keep the building up. The bigger existential or theological I don't know what had the word to just critical inflection moment is, like you say, we teach Christian faith around love and grace and gentleness and kindness and self-control and around truth. The problem is that a lot of Christians in the United States now, Christians in our own pews, have chosen power over truth, political power.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're trying to fix the wrongs that they see by leveraging power and wealth over truth. And this is why you see, I think, so many Christians behaving badly. And I think that's the bigger issue for me personally, is like, I've been preaching the gospel for this long, and we're actually moving in the wrong direction in what it is that Christians are putting their trust in. You know, so the battles, but Christian between Christian is even worse. We have division among division among division, and we don't even agree of what the things are that we value anymore. That's the biggest issue. So it's not just pandemic has forced disconnectedness. We don't communicate, and when we don't communicate, we don't have communion, and it just all kind of goes to pot. That sounds really hopeful, didn't it? That was really hopeful right there. So
something we can all dance to, John. Thank you.
Discouraging. Right. So how do you sustain yourself, both of y'all?
Positively or negatively?
Well, he doesn't drink, so I do
a lot. I have a lot of other anxiety
I have resources available to me that he doesn't have, but
and me that you don't have.
That's true. You do boot camp at 5 a.m. I'm not doing that. No, I think I think that really is. I think at different levels for pastors or people in ministry or just Christians. Yeah. I don't care if you are a pastor. The feeling of anger, we were talking about this before, is that, anger and fear, I think it was Hilliker was telling us, anger and fear cannot exist in the same space. And people are afraid. And everyone's afraid. We're afraid of all these different factors that we face in society. And because we're disconnected, the pandemic did as you said, it made things come faster. It disconnected us. It unplugged everybody. Or it plugged us into things that were not healthy for us. So we got more plugged into social media, less plugged into relationships, looking at each other in the eye. Matt and I have experienced this lately where we're having to do a lot more meetings now with people, sitting down across the table with coffee, looking at each other in the eye over all these things that have been miscommunicated or misunderstood, or there's, assumptions made about just everything. I mean, you name it on the list of things. And to try to recapture communication and communion with one another. So I think the pandemic has actually taken one of the tools of our arsenal, which is community, away from us. And so when you're not able to be together, then how do you talk about complex and difficult issues?
Right.
I mean, I think about, you're talking about center edge ministry. Jesus is center edge. That's why I always think of Chapelwood as center edge, because Jesus was center edge. Jesus was right in the middle of the religious establishment, and yet he was on the edge of it. He didn't forsake it, but he operated on the edge of it, which was threatening both to the people on the outside and the inside. And that's where I think churches are going to have to find their space. If you're just trying to protect your building and you're trying to hold on, you're trying to get back to normal, you're screwed. You're going in the wrong direction. I think.
Right.
So in terms of taking care of ourselves, I think that there's, at least, John and I have talked about this collectively and separately on this stuff, is that I think kind of spiritual direction is super important for us. I think having someone that we can confide in at a space where we can kind of just show up and just be our vulnerable selves is super important. I think having space to breathe. When I was cycling, I had a guy that I cycled with, when we were going up a hill, said, now we have to be able to recover going up a hill. And I had no idea what that meant until today. realizing that we're going up a hill, but I have to find a place to recover while I'm still moving upward, against a force that I don't want to be there, right? And so some of that is learning how to draft off of each other. Some of that is learning how to drop back into all those kind of things that we have to do, but I think we have to double down on those things,
Right.
If I'm going to double down, it needs to be on those things. So.
Yeah, a therapist helps.
A therapist helps.
Therapist
Dear
is good.
Lord. Yeah.
Spiritual director is good.
Yeah.
Taking more time for yourself is good. Saying no to things that you used to say yes to all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
In ministry, you get asked to go and do everything. Say the invocation at this and be here for that and do this, and you feel bad for saying no, but it's like, I'm coming out of the pandemic. There's some things I don't want to get back into a compulsion of attendance to things that not only don't give life, but don't really align with the purpose. When you're talking about taking the right steps and making the right decision. And that sounds horrible because then, Miss Sally's breakfast that she wants me to do the invocation, all of a sudden she thinks that somehow this is dismissive of her breakfast or her cause. It's not. Yeah. It's just, there's only so many hours in a day.
And John just invites me to go to that anyway.
So I send that.
Yes.
I really appreciate you taking time to come and just share. I mean, we're real big fans of the Texas Methodist Foundation.
Absolutely.
If 50% of the pastors end up leaving the ministry, it's just in time for the United Methodist Church to split, right? So that's convenient timing for all that to happen. But TMF, the Texas Methodist Foundation, has been I think it's the biggest Methodist foundation of all of them, isn't it? I know several, like Georgia has a Methodist foundation and others, but I think Texas is by far the biggest. Yeah. And the resources that you all offer to churches through not only loans, but support, these groups that are offered, continuing education, grants.
Absolutely.
I know Matt Russell's been on the ministries we've been a part of, have been a part of that. So I really appreciate the work that you do, and be praying for you and as you continue that work.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate you very much.
Hey, tell Bishop Huey, hey, we like Bishop Huey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like her too.
Yeah.
She's cool.
Will
She's
do.
Good people. Thanks so much.
Hey,
we
bless
love
you.
Yeah. You bet.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Well, John, that was a great conversation with Lisa Greenwood. She's a gift to the church and what she's doing in life and in ministry, and it's good to have these kind of conversations with folks. I noticed we were drinking some coffee during this podcast.
Yes, I downed mine early and graduated to doctor.
This is from what, Lampshade?
Lampshade.
And it's brewed for us by our own Chapelwood United Methodist coffee shop that we have.
Hospitality team.
These guys are great.
We have all kinds of new fancy. What is this?
I know we've got all sorts of things. So
cool.
Yeah. So if come check out the coffee shop. It's a good place to get an excellent cup of coffee, a book, and hang out.
We're doing a competition for we can come up with a name.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, we have to come up with a name for the coffee shop.
Yeah, the hospitality team wants to kind of have.
Yeah, so if you have an idea for a name of the coffee shop, send it in.
Yeah. And I suggested we not go with higher grounds. We kind of stay away from kind of.
That's like my brother and I we're going to do a barbecue competition. We're going to call it Holy Smokes.
Yeah,
Holy Smoke. That's good.
Well,
go ahead. You lead the out this time.
Well, I'm Matt Russell.
And I'm John Stevens.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.
I love the way you did. And this is Pod Have Mercy. Pod Have Mercy.
See if it lines up with it. Pod Have Mercy.
Pod Have Mercy.